In the summer of 1976, in a quiet California town surrounded by farmland, a yellow school bus rolled down a dusty road. 26 children were heading home after spending the day on a summer class trip to the Chowchilla Fairground swimming pool. Just another hot afternoon. Until it wasn't. That afternoon, the bus, and everyone on it, vanished. What followed was to be the largest kidnapping in American history.
Welcome to History Corner.
55-year-old school bus driver Ed Ray knew these back roads like the back of his hand. He'd driven this route for years. That day, his bus carried 26 kids, the oldest among them being 14-year-old Michael Marshall. The youngest was only 5 years old. Ed Ray was described as a strong, quiet man that everybody liked and respected. Around 4 p.m., just outside of town, as the kids were laughing and singing, as kids do on a bus, the bus was forced to a stop as a white van pulled out in front of them and blocked the road. As Ed said, "What the heck is this?" and tried to go around the van. 2 men boarded the bus wearing pantyhose over their heads and carrying sawed-off shotguns. Ed was told to be quiet and go to the back of the bus. One of them took over the wheel while the other held Ed at gunpoint. A third man followed the bus in the van that had barricaded the road. Jody Heffington later said, "I'd never been around guns. You only see bad guys in the movies with stockings on. So I knew it wasn't good." Larry Park, who was only 6 years old at the time, later said, "Where their eyes were, it almost looked hollow. It was like looking at death." The kidnappers drove to Berenda Slough, a shallow branch of the Chowchilla River, where they hid the bus in the tall bamboo where it couldn't be seen from any road. There also was another van, this one green. The children would soon discover that both vans had the rear windows painted black, and the interiors were insulated with soundproof paneling. A van was pulled up close to the bus, and one by one the children were ordered into the van. They had to jump. The kidnappers didn't want any footprints on the ground. When the first van was full, it was moved away, and the second took its place, and the remaining children were loaded. "It was just stifling," said Larry Park. 10-year-old Jody Heffington tried to keep the younger kids calm. Parents began to panic when they realized their children weren't home or coming home. They worked with police to try to retrace the bus's route, trying to figure out what on earth could have happened. It was just before sundown when a police pilot spotted the bus. It could only be seen from the air. Sheriff Bates called the FBI for help and then had the parents meet at the fire station to brief them on what they knew so far. For the next 11 hours, the mobile prison zigzagged across California back roads. No talking, no explanation, just the hum of tires. Then, in the dead of night, the vans stopped. Their long, terrifying ride ended nearby a rock and gravel quarry near Livermore, about 100 miles northwest of Chowchilla. At the edge of the quarry, buried 12 feet beneath dirt and gravel, was a semi-truck trailer, completely underground. The kidnappers had turned it into a prison. They had planned for this for over a year. The back door on the van opened, and a child was grabbed and pulled out, and the door slammed shut again. This happened over and over. The fear in the van grew. The children in the van had no idea what was happening, no idea where they were. Just the door would open, another one grabbed and taken out. The children in the vans really thought they were taken out to be killed one by one. Jennifer Brown Hyde, who was 9 at the time, said, "I just felt like an animal being taken to slaughter." As they pulled a child out of the van, the kidnappers would demand their name. They were making a list, just a calm, unnerving order. "Tell me your name." One young girl gave a smart-ass answer and was immediately told, "If you don't tell us your name, you're never going to see your mom and dad again." Then the child was taken to a square hole in the ground and forced down a wooden ladder, over and over, until they were all down the hole. Then, to their horror, the ladder was pulled up. They threw down a roll of toilet paper, one roll of toilet paper for 27, and said, "We'll be back for you," and a manhole cover was sealed over the opening. They would later discover the kidnappers had also placed 2 100-pound industrial batteries and a wooden box over the hole as well, and filled it in with dirt. Inside the trailer were a bunch of mattresses, some water jugs, some bread, peanut butter, and cereal. Not enough to last very long, especially for 27 people. There were holes cut in the wheel wells for toilets. A single ventilation pipe, rigged to a battery-powered fan, offered the only breath of fresh air. It was like a coffin. Linda Correjo Labandera, who was 10 at the time, said, "It was like a giant coffin for all of us." Over the next 12 hours, the food had all been eaten, and the roof of the trailer, already bowed in from the weight of the dirt, began to creak and sag. Dust drifted down from above as the structure strained even though wooden support beams had been put in, and then the fan stopped working. Inside the trailer, panic set in. The air grew hotter. Some children sobbed. Others lay still, catatonic with fear. But Ed Ray kept his head. He told the kids to stay calm. But after hours underground, with no sign of the kidnappers returning, Ed and a few older boys realized something terrifying. They were going to have to get themselves out. No one was coming. Behind the Chowchilla kidnapping were 3 young men from affluent backgrounds, not the typical profile for such a crime. The ringleader was Frederick Woods IV, aged 24. He was the son of a wealthy San Francisco Bay Area businessman who owned the Livermore quarry where the children were buried. Joining him were brothers James and Richard Schoenfeld, 24 and 22. Like Woods, the Schoenfelds were from upper-middle-class families in the upscale community of Portola Valley. They had no criminal records. But all 3 shared a sense of entitlement and obsession with money, particularly with getting it fast. This was not a spontaneous crime. The kidnapping had been in the works for over 18 months. Woods had been inspired by a scene from the movie Dirty Harry, where a school bus is hijacked and became fixated on the concept. He envisioned a real-life version, with a ransom in the millions. The plan was methodical. First, they acquired 2 used box vans, which they outfitted to prevent escape. Blacked-out interiors, reinforced panels, ventilation holes. Then came the buried trailer at the quarry, which they stocked with basic supplies and reinforced with wood beams, steel plates, and layers of soil. They even tested the ventilation system and estimated how long the victims could survive underground. Their motive was straightforward: ransom. They planned to demand $5 million from the state of California for the release of the children. What they hadn't planned for was the phone lines being jammed due to overwhelming media coverage, and as they fumbled with their extortion scheme, 27 lives were hanging by a thread. Ed Ray didn't try to escape right away for fear that somebody was up there just waiting. But Michael Marshall was willing to take the chance. I thought to myself, if we're going to die, we're going to die getting the hell out of here, he recalled. Ed and a few of the older boys began stacking the mattresses, climbing toward the roof of the trailer, toward the trapdoor that had sealed them in. They could feel the steel plate, immovable, buried under hundreds of pounds of dirt and batteries. Still, they pushed, over and over again. Ed and Michael worked for hours trying to wedge a piece of wood into the opening in the roof. They were eventually able to slide the metal cover and the batteries out of the way. But then, Marshall saw there was a wooden box placed atop the exit as well. He decided to dig beneath it. Park remembered. He dug until he was exhausted, and then he kept on digging. There was no quit in him. The other children cheered him on as he worked. With raw hands, he dug through the soil. It was slow, painful, suffocating, but he wouldn't stop. They had been underground nearly 16 hours, and suddenly, this ray of sunlight came down into the opening, shining through the dust, and one of boys described it like a bunch of shooting stars. Michael carefully peered out to make sure their abductors weren't nearby. They weren't. No one was. Then Ed began handing the other 25 children out of the truck up to Michael. One by one, they emerged. 26 children, one brave bus driver, all alive. It was about 8 p.m. It wasn't long before quarry workers spotted the ragged group, huddled together and clearly in distress. The workers immediately called the police and emergency responders. Within hours, the world would learn the incredible truth. The children of Chowchilla had rescued themselves. Alameda County sheriffs wanted to get the children away from the area as quickly as possible. The closest place to take them to with a medical staff was the Santa Rita jail. They were immediately given food and water and clothes to wear. Over the next few hours, jail doctors and EMTs examined and treated them, and sheriffs took down statements and descriptions of the kidnappers. After care and questioning, the children were loaded onto buses and taken home. It was 4 a.m. when they finally reunited with their families, and then the hunt for the kidnappers began. Investigators quickly realized that this was not an area the general public had access to. Whoever did this would have to have keys to the quarry. They started looking into Frederick Woods, son of the owner of the quarry. Security guards told investigators that they had seen 3 young men digging a large hole months before the kidnapping. A warrant was issued for the father's 78-acre estate in Portola Valley. They found a written plan, including how they would deal with things that could go wrong. They found a draft of a ransom note, and the hamburger wrapper on which were written the names. Investigators also discovered a rental contract for a storage facility. What was in the storage facility? The vans used to transport the victims. They had planned to blackmail the state of California for $5 million, but they were unable to get through with the phone lines jammed. So they decided to take a nap and try again later. By the time they woke up, the news was full of reports of the children's escape and return home. It was too late. So they ran. Their flight didn't last long. 8 days after the kidnapping, Richard Schoenfeld turned himself in. Fred and James kept running. James Schoenfeld was arrested in Menlo Park 2 weeks later. The same day, Frederick Woods was caught by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police just across the Washington-Canadian border. Woods claimed they were in serious debt, and "We needed multiple victims to get multiple millions, and we picked children because children are precious. The state would be willing to pay ransom for them. They don't fight back. They're vulnerable. They will mind." Woods and the Schoenfelds were charged with 27 counts of kidnapping and 8 counts of bodily harm. All 3 pled guilty to the kidnapping charges, but not guilty to the 8 counts of bodily harm. They were given mandatory life prison sentences without parole. With the kidnapper's sentence, the kids thought their nightmare was over, but it wasn't. Only 4 years later, the kidnappers' attorneys appealed the finding of bodily harm, claiming any injuries suffered did not rise to level of bodily harm under the law. As a result, their sentences were changed to life with the possibility of parole. It felt like a slap in the face for the kids. 5 weeks after their escape, the children and their bus driver were treated to a trip to Disneyland. The hope that such a good memory would help wash over the horrible memories. If only it was that easy. People quickly assumed Ray was the hero of the whole affair, and as you would expect, a lot of attention was focused on him. This didn't sit well with many of the children. While they loved Ed, referring to themselves as Ed's 26, they felt the praise for saving the day should have been directed at another. When they first returned home and they were surrounded by the press, Michael Marshall said he was looking forward to telling his story, but said his principal thwarted the opportunity. Out of nowhere, Principal Tatum stepped in and said, "Why don't we just give them a break, boys? Let them go home. Get some sleep," Marshall recalled. "And so we got in the car and left. It was my chance to tell the world what happened, getting out and everything," he said. "And I didn't do it. I let the grown-ups do it." Larry Park was a little more direct. "I was telling people, Mike Marshall dug us out. It was Mike that dug us out." But nobody was listening. For many of the children, the trauma never truly ended. Nightmares, anxiety, and deep mistrust followed them into adulthood. Several struggled with addiction. Others found it hard to speak of what happened, even decades later. One boy later shot a lost Japanese tourist with a BB gun when the man's car broke down in front of his house. Psychiatrist Lenore Ter said, "There are a number of these kids who have gone to prison for doing something controlling to somebody else. I hated going to sleep because every night I was having nightmares, Larry Park said. Mum and Dad were told not to come in when we have nightmares, he said, recalling experts' advice at the time to stop rewarding our behavior of having the nightmares, so the dreams in turn would stop. Horrible advice. Larry, who spent his youth addicted to drugs, now owns a business and is a volunteer pastor at his local church, says his nightmares have finally stopped, and he has been sober for 9 years. Michael Marshall, who had worked so hard to dig out of that horrible prison, lost his way to alcohol for a large chunk of his life, but he too is now sober and finally happy. Jennifer Brown Hyde said it took her decades before she could sleep without a nightlight on. In the years that followed, the kidnappers continued to petition for parole. They were repeatedly denied parole until the 2010s, when supporters of their release, including retired Judge William Newsom, the father of California's current governor, Gavin Newsom, publicly advocated for the kidnappers' parole. Nobody was physically injured, huge factor in the case, the elder Newsom said at a news conference. In a surprising decision, Richard Schoenfeld was released in 2012. His brother James followed in 2015. Just 2 years ago at the last hearing, James, who designed the contraption where we were held, said he spent years designing a better one, Linda Carrejo Labendera says. Does that sound like someone who is remorseful? Jody went into a huge depression, Linda recalled. She would say, "Linda, it's all my fault. It's all my fault they're getting out." Soon afterward, Jody Heffington Medrano couldn't get out of bed no more. She was so weak because she was just drinking so much, her son said, sobbing. She wouldn't eat because she was so depressed, and she basically just couldn't process life the way she was supposed to. For over 30 years, Jody, the big sister figure on the bus, traveled to nearly every parole hearing. It wasn't until after her death in 2021 that Woods was paroled, and after more than 40 years behind bars, Frederick Woods, the mastermind, was granted parole in 2022. It was his 18th time before the parole board. He was denied parole numerous times for dismissing of the severity of his crime, his behavior in prison, and his possession of contraband like pornography and cell phones. It was also discovered he was running a gold mining business and a car dealership from behind bars without telling the prison. The authorities only discovered the businesses because a workers' compensation lawsuit was filed against him. Woods had also inherited a trust fund reportedly worth $100 million. He also still owned the 2 vans that had been used in the kidnapping. Sickening. For the victims, it felt like justice had been undone. They were buried alive, but not broken. The children of Chowchilla and their bus driver turned a nightmare into a story of survival. In the face of fear, buried beneath the earth, 26 children and 1 bus driver didn't give up. They rose, they survived, and in doing so, they made history. "I never gave up, not completely," Larry Park said, "because I was taught, at 6 years old by a 14-year-old boy, you don't give up, you keep digging." Stories like this remind us of the incredible strength people can show in the face of trauma. But survival is only the beginning, and healing takes time. If you or someone you know is struggling with the effects of trauma, help is available, and often free. You're not alone, and you don't have to carry the weight by yourself. Don't let others tell you not to get help, or that you don't need it. If you feel like you need help, get it. You are not alone. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from history. See you next time.